Cheatham, Global Marketing Director here at Third Stage Consulting Group. Brian Potts, Chief Client Officer, is joining me today to talk about vendor negotiations as we go into the new year. So thank you so much for joining me today, Brian.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So take us through kind of a high level of what organizations need to be prepared for when negotiating with software vendors.
Yeah, well, understand that this is what software vendors do every single day, and this is not what your organization does hopefully once every 10, 20 years. So prepare for it and understand that you need help.
Right. And so you've gone through the evaluation process, you've selected your software, and now you're going into negotiation process. How long does that typically take going through negotiations?
That can vary a lot depending on the size and complexity of your organization, what it is you're purchasing. There's a lot of variances in, a straightforward base financial ERP package, can go pretty quickly. If you're talking about an SAP construct where you've got, any number of modules and builds and variations, it can go quite a bit more because there's a lot more back and forth, a lot of validation on what is in that contract. The review of it can take quite a bit more time. So
it depends.
The consultant answer is
it depends. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll take it. So when it comes to making sure that everything that you need as an organization is including in that contract, who are the people that you need to have involved in that conversation?
Well, you'll need to have folks that were involved in the selection of the software. So if that was done internally, make sure those people are involved. Make sure you've got some legal representation, whether that's internal or external counsel. We recommend also having a third party, if it's a complex scenario where, because the lawyers don't understand what you need outside. They're looking at the terms and conditions and, making sure you're going to, not accelerate costs and that kind of thing. But look at what's being proposed by the vendor and maybe have a consulting firm, a third party that helps with vendor negotiations. Specifically, what you want to make sure is that you're getting in the contract what you thought you were getting when you went through that evaluation. When you signed off and said, yeah, this is the right software, you want that perspective translated into the contract. It isn't always that way.
Interesting. I know we just talked about some ERP failures on our ground control podcast of late, and a lot of that came down to what we saw in software demos was not what we got. How can you mitigate that risk within the demo process to make sure, like you said, the software you're getting actually matches what's in the contract?
Yeah, it's very hard to translate demonstration into contract. One thing you can do is during the demonstrations, confirm when you see something that you like, confirm if that functionality is going to be included in what they propose. And then when they propose it to you in the contract, validate and say, confirming that's what I saw in the demonstration. That's a kind of a verbal assessment, but vendors aren't going to flat out lie and tell us, if it wasn't in there, they're going to say, no, that's something included. You'll have the option to purchase that later. So do that quick validation as a starting point. Again, if you're using a consultant through the selection process, that's our job to help you match up and make sure what's proposed to you is what you saw and wanted.
Gotcha. And just so kind of our community understands, and I know your experience as an independent and agnostic leader and executive here at Third Stage, you've seen a lot of vendor bias that can sometimes be aggressive when it comes to businesses buying software or signing contracts by a certain time. Why is that?
Well, by vendor bias, you're talking internal or from the vendors?
Yeah, so
you need to sign by this date?
Or if you are going through a demonstration, sometimes we've heard companies being misled, which has led to implementation failures. A lot of times, much more of the high profile ones we talk about too. But I'm just thinking being a mid-tier or even a small business going through this process, it can be daunting to know, am I actually being told the truth or am I getting what I need to get within this contracting demo phase?
Yeah, so keep in mind, one thing to really consider is with the current SaaS environment, the cloud environment, whatever you want to call it right now, where you've got a subscription model to software, the number one target of these software vendors is to get you signed up. They're less concerned with getting you signed up with the right thing. Once they've got you locked in and start that implementation, you're locked into whatever additional fees and workarounds are needed. So the motivation for the vendors is to get you on as a client. They're less concerned about matching up exactly what you want because they know, and it's true, that there's going to be modification needed no matter what. It's the degree to which how tightly you can contain and understand those costs up front. So understand the reason that they're pushing you for that is because it's their business, it's what they do. They need to get you onto that subscription model so that they build in the continuous revenues. And that ties into coming up, especially on the end of the year, you're going to hear even more pressures from these vendors. You need to sign by this quarter, by this date. Now they're using end of year. There's always some metric that they're measuring that to.
So if I'm involved in a contract negotiation with a software vendor and they're like, Kyler, you need to sign by end of year or you're going to lose this deal. Is that true?
We've rarely seen that to be the case. Now, I have heard recently that there are some cases where vendors have actually come back, because we've been calling out for years that vendors, will say that and then they won't own up to it. Basically, it's easier for the vendor for you to sign by a certain year. There's quotas involved.
Oh, sure.
There's bonuses. So the sales group, the salesperson that you're working with really wants to get that sale. It doesn't mean they're not going to take that sale and do what they need to January 1st if it comes down to that. We have heard a couple cases where vendors actually are kind of firming up, just, I don't know, to prove it and disrupt that mentality a little bit, that they're coming in with some slight changes. I wouldn't say they're significant. But they're saying, see, we told you, and then we fight back, and they say, well, we need to hold on this, and it just takes more time and effort if you don't sign by the end of the year, but don't feel pressure to do that. And what I stress with that is it's far worse to have to go through a renegotiation, working again with the vendors, than it is to bite off on software that you're not ready for.
Right, and this might be a not kosher question, but are there vendors that are harder to negotiate with than others? And is that something that you consider when recommending software to organizations?
No, that should not drive the decision point to software. If a software is right for you, it's the right software. Make it work. One thing to consider, you're asking if some vendors are more difficult than others. It's not so much vendors in general, it's the sales people or the sales organizations within the vendor community. Some, I'm not going to name names, but some are, some are a little bit, come across as a little bit more rigid than others. They're all willing to negotiate to win the business. One thing that helps with that too is, as you're getting into time for negotiation, is you're selecting your vendor. Don't tell the vendor that they're a selected vendor, now let's negotiate. That's a horrible thing to do, because you've lost your negotiation leverage. Tell them you're into the finalists. You want to talk a little bit more about what these costs are going to look like. Can we maybe firm these up a little bit, and talk about how we might be able to provide some savings so that we can make an accurate decision. So always keep two in there, because you never know. One of them might come in and say, we're going to cut our costs in half. And the vendors know that. As long as they know there's competition in there, they're going to be more aggressive with discounting.
Interesting. That's a great tactic. When it comes to that cloud subscription model, I want to talk a little bit more about that, because that seems to be a new trend, or a kind of a buzzword within the industry. Is that something that you feel like down the road will cost organizations more as opposed to an on-premise solution, or is it kind of too soon to tell?
Well, that's the ongoing question. The cloud isn't new. It's kind of that software as a service subscription model. It's constantly being modified, hosting variations. It's always changing a little bit. But what the vendors are trying to do is get consistent revenue. It helps with their valuations. It helps predictability. I think what we're finding is over a long period of time, it's the lease versus buy. So yes, you're going to spend a little bit more money long term, but up front, you're going to save and help with cash flow. Vendors are also getting creative with that, and they're having hybrids. You can now put some more money down to lower your ongoing costs in a lot of cases. Some are changing their subscription models to, very differences. Some are basing it on user count. Some are basing it on volume and different metrics for your organization to help fit it into a bucket that will work better for you long term. So that goes into the negotiation process as well.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. That's very illuminating. So knowing that when you're going through this contracting, and you gave us that great outline, what are some other red flags that a lot of times organizations may not be aware of when going through vendor contracting?
Yeah, a couple key ones to watch out for, especially in recent days, is one is the idea of integrations and third-party software. They might have reference in their contract that we will need to integrate with X and Y, but that cost isn't included in the contract. Make sure that you understand and you've looked at your total cost of ownership beforehand, how that is involved and how that is included either in or not in the contract. If it's supposed to be in the contract, make sure that it's worded in there appropriately, and make sure if it's not in there that you understand that and that's still acceptable for your total cost. So that's one thing that's often overlooked is they'll say, yeah, we know we're going to need to make integrations. We don't know what that looks like. Either we're going to do that at an additional time and cost, or you just need to take care of that on your own. So that's one thing to watch out for. Probably the biggest red flag right now with contracting is availability of resources on the implementation side itself.
Gotcha.
So whether it's the vendor or system integrator you're working with, a lot of times they're getting you to sign a contract so they've got their software package and revenues coming in. But in terms of implementing, they might be months and months out. Make sure you've got confirmation on their availability, what they're going to do, if they're locking in timelines, what kind of resources they're looking at. Make sure you've got some clarity in that you're not just signing off, we'll implement whenever we can, because we're seeing in some cases delays of 6-8 months until vendor integration teams are available.
Sure, and do you have any influence as an organization over that timeline? Obviously, you want to make sure you're aware of it within the contracting, but is there anything else you can do to expedite it, maybe in the negotiation process?
Absolutely. I mean, understand these are constrained resources, and the vendors have to decide when and where they're going to be placed. So if you let them know that it's critical to you and you're signing off on their availability, have that put in the agreement. Now, there's got to be some leverage for the vendors on that, understanding that they're, maybe they can swap out comparable resources per your approval, that sort of thing. But let them know that that's critical. You need to get this implementation started by this date, and then have them confirm that in the agreement. So yeah, you can vary. Understand there might be some additional costs with that.
Yeah.
And be fair with them.
Sure.
Don't just demand everything and throw your hands up when it doesn't work out perfectly. Understanding, we were talking earlier about supply chain issues.
Right.
It ties in to the vendor community as well.
Absolutely. Definitely something to be mindful and aware of. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about that. If our community wants any additional information about vendor contracting, what would be some things you would recommend?
Well, give us a shout. Information is noted below here. We like talking about this stuff. This is what we do. Also, subscribe to our channel. We've got ongoing updates, information. Look at some white papers. We've got a lot of documentation over the years on variations to vendor contracting, what to watch out for, and how to approach it. So.
Excellent. Well, obviously a very key subject here to ensure that your digital transformation or technology transformation is successful. As Brian said, please subscribe to our channel, and we put out new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.